Welcome, everyone. This is Greg Rock, and on behalf of BPMinstitute.org and IBM, I'd like to welcome you to today's roundtable, Building a World-Class BPM Center of Excellence, featuring Frank La Rocca, Director of Shared Services at Con Edison. As many of you know, it's through our roundtable series that BPM Institute promotes knowledge sharing and networking amongst our members and the BPM community at large. We also do this through our website, our training programs, and our electronic bulletins. You can find more detail on those on our website. I have a few quick housekeeping items I'd like to mention at the start today, and then we'll get right underway with our discussion. We're lucky enough to have Frank La Rocca with us, Director of Shared Services at Con Edison, as I mentioned, talking about the efforts underway at Con Edison around building a world-class BPM Center of Excellence. One of the most common requests we get from our members is to have real-world case studies on highly poignant topics, and I think the timing is fantastic for Frank to come and join us, and we appreciate IBM inviting Frank to participate in today's roundtable. Let me just set the stage a little bit here. As we mentioned on our website, all the attendees and participants of this roundtable will receive access to BPM BlueWorks, a new initiative from IBM that provides tools, including access to process, strategy, and capability maps, as well as some browser-based tools to edit and share new business designs online with your colleagues. I'll have more information about that towards the end of today's webcast. Con Edison has approximately $33 billion in assets, and they're one of the nation's largest investor-owned energy companies serving the New York Metro West area, where I grew up most of my life. Con Edison is in the process of developing a world-class business process improvement center of excellence to drive everything from building basic process model repositories to leading large-scale cross-organizational process reengineering initiatives. And our seminar today with Frank La Rocca is going to dive into a number of those areas. Frank joined Con Edison in 2008 and is responsible for strategic alignment, business process improvement, and service management. Frank is also in the process of reviewing and strengthening the shared services business processes at Con Edison and establishing a methodology for structured business process reengineering and establishing a portfolio management office. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce Frank La Rocca.
And thank you very much. It's great to be here and very nice to be asked to be a part of this. I hope the members listening get something really good from this. I like to share experiences and hope that others benefit from lessons learned and some of the good fortunes that I have been blessed to have. So with that, I'll start. So as you had mentioned, we're going to be talking about business process improvement in our Center of Excellence at Con Edison. And really it's why we're going to talk about why would a company want to introduce BPM and what kind of value can it bring to the company. I often find prior to my role at Con Edison, I was at Keyspan Energy for 20 years. And I often find that my role is understanding what's out there in the world, what technologies are available, what methodologies are available, and synthesizing that back to either at Keyspan or now at Con Edison. And so I believe that IBM has a great suite of products, and sometimes it can be overwhelming. Sometimes there's so many modules and so many different names and name changes, it's sort of hard to navigate through all of that complexity, and often I find the struggle is bringing that great information into the company and communicating it to the company in a way that is understood by the C-level officers. And that's what I hope to do today, is to share a little bit about how I, a relatively new employee at Con Ed, taken some of these concepts and really sold them first as a consultant to Con Ed and then as a full-time employee to the C-level officers that I've been interacting with to build a BPM Center of Excellence. So we'll be covering why build an enterprise-wide BPM Center of Excellence, what I call Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of BPM. Certainly you will not find that in any textbook. I just use that to help communicate sort of the steps necessary to create a BPM COE. They may not necessarily be sequential, but I think it's helpful for those who are not so fully involved with BPM to understand them in a sequential way. So I found it as a helpful way to communicate, talk about the BPM Center of Excellence, and perhaps most importantly, my vision for where we stand today, tomorrow, and the next day, and then give an example of a case study that we're working on right now and talk about some lessons learned. So why BPM? Setting the stage. I find, and I'm sure most of the audience would agree, that over time, business processes become inefficient. I find that most of the people who run the processes are so busy they don't really get enough time to step back and see the big picture. And as a result, business as usual sets in, a lot of quick fixes get introduced and create what's, sort of a kludgy environment without really anybody knowing it. It sort of just creeps in. And it can become very cumbersome very quickly without really anybody knowing. Also, in my tenure at Keyspan, we had a number of acquisitions and mergers, and I find that BPM, a structured approach to BPM, is probably one of the best ways to integrate two companies because of the reasons identified on the slide: multiple systems, data proliferation, incomplete past integrations, and non-standard processes often end up with multiple processes doing the same exact thing in the same company. And lastly, I feel that most of the time in any business process, the process truly only lives in the brains of those employees who actually run the process. And that can be very dangerous. So if a particular person goes out on vacation or retires or wins the lottery and leaves, the company could be vulnerable. And it really, many times you have to question that employee, well, how does it work today? And so one of my goals, I believe that business processes are assets. And it's very important for any organization to treat a business process like an asset so that it doesn't go away and you can account for them. So I think those are the reasons why business process management is important to any organization as time marches on and the businesses change. So going right into my Abraham Maslow hierarchy and leading off from where I just left, as I said earlier, business processes are assets. And I don't know about most of the members of the audience, but I can tell you my experience during Y2K, there was a big scramble to everybody to go out and document their current process. And if you were lucky, some people used Visio, but most people used either PowerPoint, some people used paper and pencil, some people used Word, whatever their tool du jour was, they decided to flow their process that way. And right after Y2K came and went with a fizzle, so did all of those process maps. They sort of disappeared. Either they got lost, they quickly became stale, or they were buried on somebody's PC, laptop, never to be used again. So my theory is that if a company decides to embark on business process reengineering, improvement, or a center of excellence, really it should start with identifying a repository, creating a repository that can be used to store all business processes. I think it would be a shame if a company picks a tool to do business process mapping and sets that tool loose and lets everybody use the tool independently. It's probably better than nothing, but the company really loses because it'll be hard to find all of those processes. So establish one place, one center where this repository would live, and basically think of it as a database of all the processes that you've ever modeled. And more importantly, think about the standards. So as you turn this tool loose to your organization, make sure that people are modeling their processes in the exact same way. And that goes down to naming conventions, model detail. So how detailed do you want to get in modeling? You can go from level 1 to level 5 in terms of detail. So basically a central repository that is governed by a small group of people that know which processes have been checked in, which processes are being worked on right now and that govern the corporate processes. And, my feeling on this hierarchy is you can stop there. If a company just wants to do that, I think you'd get benefit out of it. I think any company would benefit out of having one centralized place to go for all their processes. That's not my ultimate vision. I certainly want to go further than that, but I think it's at least a good place to start. If you go that far and you want to, I think it would be a great idea to start doing some as-is process modeling. And that is, as it sounds, get a group of people in the room currently responsible for the as-is process, using a tool and model those processes and have standards, naming conventions, and so forth for every way in which you think about a process. So when the people enter the room, there should be a standard protocol for who's in the room, why they're in the room, and the methodology that which you're going about the as-is process modeling should be well known before you start your first process. So that would be on the as-is process level on my hierarchy. And you can, while you're doing this, you have the people in the room who are responsible for the process identifying the current gaps in the process, waits, delays, overlaps, reworks, all the things that they think could be made better. And I'm sure we're all familiar with people who are, they complain about their current process, and when they're in the room, and if this as-is process is being facilitated appropriately, you can take those complaints and turn them into action items and get a wish list of all process improvement opportunities. And I found in my experience that sometimes these opportunities that are identified during your as-is process modeling may not be that complex to implement. They may not even imply technology. They could be a simple business process change. And that could be pretty quick. And you may or may not decide for a particular process to take it to the next level of my hierarchy here. So you may stop at the as-is and say, you know what, we uncovered some really great opportunities for improvement, and we may never have to take it to the to-be scenario. So I don't use this as an absolute. You can stop at any step along the way. If you feel that there is room for improvement, significant room for improvement, that requires a bit more analysis, I would recommend taking it to what I call the to-be level. And that is where you have the same group of people who just went through the detailed as-is process, identified all the opportunities, and you start laying out the way in which the process should look or could look. And that would be what we call the to-be world. And using a tool, so we use the IBM WebSphere tool for all of this that I'm talking about. Using this tool, you can scenario plan or create what-if scenarios to say, if we change the as-is process from this to this, what would happen? And you can play that out in terms of, would it shorten the cycle time for the process? Would it decrease cost? Would it increase cost? Maybe that's an objective. Whatever your objective is, you can do the analysis on the process improvement before you actually touch the real live process. So before you call IT to make a coding change, you have your client sitting in the room designing the to-be process, and you can do multiple to-be scenarios and have the group pick the best to-be scenario that satisfies their needs, which is really powerful, because if you have the group that's ultimately going to be responsible for managing the to-be scenario, it's really important to get their buy-in and have them select it. Then you go give it to IT if there's an IT change, and there's a lot of ownership associated with this methodology. Going up the ladder, one more step is process monitoring, and I'm happy to say we're at Con Ed. We're about to embark on our monitoring journey, so it's pretty exciting. And since I've only been here for this August 1st will be a year, I'm pretty excited that we're up to this level already at Con Edison. And process monitoring really is what it sounds like, is you attach the underlying process to a dashboard. And so you can have managers and directors come in, theoretically sign on to their workstation in the morning and look at a process map of their business unit and see where there are waits and gaps and delays and where the bottlenecks are, and allow them to understand what's going on real time. And the difference, I would have to stress the word real time here, because most times, in my experience anyway, most of us managers are leading with information that's a couple weeks old. You have to close the books, or you have to get a certain report run, and it's always after the fact information. The monitoring that I'm talking about at this level would be monitoring the living process as it is today, right this very second. So how many purchase orders are in the hopper right now? How many purchase orders are waiting for approval right now? So forth, and something like that. You put that information into the leader's hands, and you can significantly change the way in which you manage your business. And my last rung on the hierarchy would be where the client themselves gets to manipulate the process. And I will call this nirvana. I will say that IBM has examples of customers that have achieved this. I haven't achieved this level myself, neither at Keyspan nor at Con Ed. And this is where when a process is occurring, you have a manager come in, look at their dashboard, and use the dashboard to actually throttle things in their own process. So if you have a lot of POs that are waiting for authority or approval, you click a button on your panel and you free up some resources somewhere to go and focus their attention on PO approval. Of course, that's an example, but that's really theoretically where you're going. And put a lot of the parameters, obviously this is never going to replace the need for IT or IT coding, but if you put a lot of control in the business owner's hands, let them manipulate their own process real time, that really would be a win-win situation for the enterprise, not only the Business Process Improvement Center of Excellence, but the client that are running the process, and certainly IT, because then they're sort of out of the business of doing sort of mundane parameter adjustments. So that's my hierarchy, and I've used this hierarchy to, number one, explain my vision to Con Ed as to what do I think would be important for Con Ed to do, and I use this at Keyspan as well to say, this is something to aspire to, and this is a big ship to turn. It takes some time, but let's lay the groundwork. And I found that in both cases at Con Ed and Keyspan, it was a very effective way of communicating the vision without overwhelming them with detail and mentioning things like service-oriented architecture or any other technical term that the business community or the senior officers may not be familiar with in this area. So hopefully that's helpful. On the next slide, I talk a little bit about the vision of the Center of Excellence. And I'm not in the habit of reading, and I'm sure the folks can read very clearly what it says here, but it's really promote and facilitate the business process management by developing the standards and skills within the organization to really make it happen. Our objectives is to develop a guideline and procedures for documenting all of this, analyzing our processes, establishing standards and tools. I mentioned already that we're using the IBM WebSphere tool, and institute governance mechanisms to make sure that this is playing out the way in which I would expect it to play out. So PMO touch points, design reviews, etc. And lastly, the charter provide end-to-end visibility, improve the efficiency of the business processes, and so forth and so on. You can read them as is. So my vision for today, tomorrow, and the next day. This slide takes a bit of communicating, but I was brave enough to use this slide with a lot of the senior officers, even though it may look a little confusing. I think in any given process, there are a number of actors involved. And so in the purchasing process that I've been talking about so far, we have customers, we have buyers, we have warehouse people, we have accounts payable, we have delivery people, and they all get involved in the process, and they all know their process, their portion of the process very well. And we have a number of back-end systems, some legacy, some not, that provide functionality to this process. And so when I said earlier in one of the earlier slides that the business process often lies in the people's heads, I was referring to these little caricatures up top that, you know, everybody up top knows what the process is, and they know what system to go to and when to go to that system for what. And that's sort of the system. The process is sort of an implied process, that it happens because it's been happening for a very long time. It's not necessarily explicit. I often find when you get some of these folks in the room, what I call these stick figures, actors in the process, when you get some of these actors in the room, people that even sit next to each other and do the same process on a daily basis, both do it very differently. Neither of them are breaking any corporate policy, but they both believe they're doing it in the same way when in fact they're not. And when you have these as-is process modeling sessions and you have the two of them sitting next to each other talking about their daily process and how it actually flows, you get a lot of aha moments where one of them says to the other, I don't do it that way, or I've never done it that way, or why don't you do it this way? And you have a lot of conversation, and these are people who know each other for years and just never really got into the details of why they do what they do. And so I think this slide depicts that, and that you have a number of people involved in today's process and a number of systems, and it's very hard to, you know, if you're a manager of this entire process from start to finish, to figure out how many instances of that process are in flight right now. Where is the beginning of any one particular instance of a process? Where is the end? Is there a beginning? Is there an end? And if a customer or somebody along the line of the process wants to find out where they are in the process, in their version of the process, they often have to play detective and call the number of different actors in the process, or have to actually look up in multiple systems where they are. So it's sort of an ad hoc situation. So hopefully that's clear to the members, the listeners. Tomorrow, and this is where we stand today at Con Ed, we've taken a lot of those processes and we've done the as-is process model. And on slide 8 at the top, what you'll see is a visual representation of a process that we've done. And we had all the actors get into a room and talk about the as-is world. And we had all of those aha moments, and we captured all of those opportunities for improvement. But most importantly, we walked out of those as-is sessions with an agreed-upon process model. And that's what's printed on top. And so if there's any question on how things should be working, folks should be referring to that process map that everybody has just agreed upon. So at least you have a well-documented process that people can point to and say, that's how we do it. If you have new employees come on, you should point them to this model to say, this is how it works. So some of the characteristics associated with this world is the process is more explicit because it's visually available to be seen. It's standardized and understood by the people that use it. It's documented, as I mentioned before. It's not, and you know, I have a phrase here, compliance is on the honor system. So right now the process is documented, but we really didn't touch the back-end systems, and we didn't force any of the actors to go and use that process. So we're saying, hey, just make sure you're following this process. It's well documented, and this is how it goes. And the underlying IT architecture, you know, at this point, hopefully we're starting to develop a vision for thinking more about things like service-oriented architecture and how will you connect all of your underlying applications so that they can talk to one another to better provide business processes. So that's what I'm calling the tomorrow world. We at Con Edison have mapped probably about 40 to 50 of our processes, and we're at this level where at least all of the actors can point to a process map and say that's how we do it today, and that is the final version. That's what's going on today. And my next slide, on slide 9, is what I call end the next day. So this is sort of a big leap where the process layer on top is actually executing the process. So there is a explicit layer that lives on top of all of your applications that gets executed. And so, if you talk to some of the folks at IBM, they say it's as easy as when you model your process, after you finish modeling it, you press a button, and the system, the WebSphere product will go and generate a bunch of BPL, which is business process execution language, which then becomes your living, breathing process. And I'm simplifying it because it doesn't happen that easily, but I certainly believe that that's where it will go. And so you'll have the process up top. You have a middleware layer, what I call web services, that knows how to talk to all the legacy applications and the functions down below. So in the old world, I believe applications used to equal a process. So you bought an application to do a series of process. But as we know today, most of our processes span applications and they span business units. So I look more at the IT world as having an inventory of functionality available to whatever process needs it. So you can have legacy applications down below. You can have store-bought modules. You can have an ERP solution in place. As long as those are all implemented in an exposable way, so all the functionality that are embedded in all of those different types of applications should be able to be called from and reused from anywhere. That would be sort of my vision for marrying process improvement up top with an IT architecture below that enables the process improvement. And it leads to all the characteristics that you can see on the left-hand side in yellow: maximum reusability, agile, extending the life of some IT assets if you needed to do that. And the bullet that I'd like to call it is insulates the business from the technology. The business cares about running the business. The business cares about their process. So the business should care about the top layer. IT needs to care about the bottom layer. The business shouldn't necessarily be encumbered by the bottom layer. So if IT wants to make a change down below, it should be an easy swap and almost transparent to the business. So sort of decoupling the technology from the business in this model. So where are we in terms of Con Ed? What have we done? And I'll use an example that I've been talking about a little bit in terms of procurement. When I was asked to join Con Ed, we were working on an application implementation, and I was asked to take part of implementation phase 2. And so I said, okay, let's hear about it. And it was a purchasing module and purchasing application. And when I did some digging around, I found that the folks involved with implementing phase 1 really weren't happy with how phase 1 went. And when I said, well, what were the goals of phase 1 and what are the goals of phase 2, they seemed to blur together. It was sort of hard to distinguish the goals of phase 1 and phase 2. And I found that when I talked to the various constituents associated with the use of the results of phase 1, nobody was really happy with the change with phase 1. So purchasing wasn't really happy with the final product. The clients weren't really happy with the final product. And IT was now maintaining another system as opposed to retiring some older systems. So they actually increased their inventory of applications. So when I took an assessment of where we were, I actually had to deliver the bad news that I think we took a step backwards by doing phase 1, because we took a relatively cumbersome process, bought a brand new tool, implemented the brand new tool, but did not change the process. And now we have a relatively expensive, cumbersome process. So it was not sort of the scenario that we would have wanted. And I wasn't happy delivering that news, But with that came the idea that really it's very difficult to implement any piece of software, any new technology, without rethinking your business processes. So rather than jumping into phase 2, I said, let's look at all the business processes that are associated with purchasing. And let's start with that as the universe and see, and let's use this methodology that I've been talking about before. Let's talk about our as-is processes, where are the opportunities for improvement, and let's talk about the to-be world and what we can do about them. And that's exactly what we did. So on the left of this slide, you can see we did a whole bunch of as-is process facts gathering. We identified the appropriate processes that are in scope in the purchasing world. I think that this methodology, one of the cornerstones of this methodology is to really ensure that you have all the actors involved in the room at the same time. So people that are involved in the upstream of the process as well as downstream of the process. It's very important because I've been involved in business process improvement where you interview groups of people at a time and not simultaneously, and oftentimes that leads to fragmentation as well. I find it is more costly up front to get everybody in the room at the same time, but you can literally see and hear the aha moments occurring on the spot with everybody in the same room. So you can literally have people saying, oh, I didn't know why you did that, and that's why I get that report this way, or that's why I get that piece of data this way. So it's really important to have all the constituents in the room, upstream and downstream of the process, to get those aha moments. And I'll give a quick example. I'm going to simplify it just for time. But in one of the processes that we looked at here at Con Ed, we had a department that took a stack of paper and split it into two. That stack of paper had to be split into two, some things that had to be processed same day and some things that could be processed within the next few days. So there was a group of people who did that, and they would hand it over to the next step of the process. The next step of the process literally took those two separate stacks and recombined them because new technology that had been implemented over the past couple of years where the same day stuff could be processed, everything could be processed in the same day. So the original need to separate it into two piles went away. But nobody, in fact, went back to the first organization to tell them you don't need to do that anymore. The receiving organization just thought that that's how they came in. So by having everybody in the room, you had that big aha moment where you just stopped doing that. Don't separate that one pile into two. That wasn't a technology change. It was a very easy fix. Everybody in the room sort of smiled at each other, and it was a major aha moment that didn't cost a dime to fix other than just stop doing it. So that's why I would recommend that everybody gets in the room for the as-is process and define what everybody's role is in that room. The results on the right is we identified 10 business processes. We held 15 detailed process interviews. We had 6 full-day workshops, greater than approximately 50 Con Ed employees involved. And we really fostered buy-in from everybody in the room. Yes, it was painful. There's no denying that, getting everybody in the room simultaneously to talk very detailed stuff about the as-is process, but we did it. And as you can see on the left, we captured things like what is the process flow and what's the sequence of the process, what are the departments involved, who are the roles, where are the decision points, and when you have a decision point, how many times does it go this path versus this path? What's the cycle time, the duration of the particular step, and the cost. And as I said earlier, the opportunities of improvement. And then we also went to the 2B. We took all those same 10 processes and we've identified the 2B version of them. And the tool that we used was the WebSphere tool. So on slide 12, I'm sure you can't see the bottom picture. It's not meant to be really seen in its entirety. It's really meant to be more illustrative. So what you can see is a process on the bottom that is a pretty lengthy process. If I was to print it out, you would be able to wallpaper a room with this process. So it's a pretty big process. And what you see on top are the categories that we identified. As we walk through any one process, we said there are really 9 different categories of opportunities for improvement. So opportunity category number 1 is unnecessary rework within the process. Opportunity number 2, avoidable waits and delays that extend the cycle time. And you can read the rest on your own. So 9 different categories of opportunities, and they're color-coded. So as we walk through the process and as we solidified how the process actually flowed, when we identified an opportunity for improvement, we literally circled the step in the process that had the opportunity. And it's all color-coded, so it's easily identifiable later on. So by looking at the graphic down below, you can see almost dead center, there's a bullseye, and that is a clear indication that this one step in the process has a number of opportunities associated with it, and that may be where you want to focus your attention to start. So what I would say in a slide like this is very important to get the right people in the right room talking about all the different types of opportunities and where they are, and that's where the aha moments occur. And so what do we do with that? Actually, I want to take a step back 1 second on slide 12 again. While you're looking at the bottom graphic, the tool, the WebSphere tool, can do a great deal of analysis that I don't believe is humanly possible in a process like this. For example, the tool can tell you how many possible paths are there from start to finish in this process. So, we might think, something can happen 5 or 6 ways, but when you actually have a tool figure out all of these decision points and each possible path that's a viable path, it can be pretty lengthy. So the tool can tell you that. You can do analytics using the tool to say which is the most traveled path, which is the least expensive path, which is the most expensive path. And then obviously you want to try to figure out, well, how do you get from the most traveled path today to the most least expensive path in the future, assuming cost is your driver. If cost is not your driver and it's something else, then you can optimize your process around that as well. So the tool plays a big role here because I believe it can do a whole bunch of analytics that it would take a long time for any human to be able to do. So back on slide 9, I mentioned before we have those 9 categories of opportunities that are listed at the top, across the top in the various colors. And on the left, we have, this is a sample data, but we have 9 processes that we put through this process. And so what this is saying is process number 1 had 4 opportunities in category 1. Process number 1 had 5 opportunities in category 2. And in total, process number 1 had 37 opportunities for improvement. And the total number is real data for Con Edison. So in the 9 processes that we looked at, in this example, we uncovered 432 process improvement opportunities, and you can clearly see that process number 8 had the bulk of them. So this is a great way if you want to prioritize which process you want to focus on. You may want to look at process number 8 because it had the most areas for opportunity. Obviously, not every opportunity is equal, so one process may save a lot of time and money. One opportunity may save a lot of time and money, and another opportunity may not. So they're not always apples to apples, but it's a good indicator, just the count of number of opportunities per process. So that was helpful to share with the purchasing officers and the purchasing managers. Then we developed what we call a as-is process scorecard. And what you can see up top is you can say, and this is fictitious data, so none of it is real, but you can say for this sample as-is process, it costs Con Ed $400 to run on average for a complex version, $350 for a moderate version, and $150 for a simple version. Whereas working with IBM, they told us for a like-for-like process out in the outside world, leading practice is $300, $250, and $150 respectively. and best of breed cost is 200, 150, and 100 respectively. So here you can start drawing some conclusions about your own process and how you benchmark to the rest of the world, and you can take the opportunity to figure out, well, do you want to be leading practice or best of breed? And that really is dependent upon your own business model. So once you determine, where you want to be, you figure out, well, how can you get from your current cost to the leading practice cost or the best practice, best of breed cost. And on the same scorecard, we include the number of opportunities. So for this one particular process, we uncovered 145 process improvement opportunities, and they span those 9 categories as I talked about before. And then for this particular process, we identified 4 what I'll call sliders that talk about, for this one particular process, again, this is all sample data, but according to the sample data, Con Ed has 3 to 7 approval levels where best practice would have 1 to 3. Con Edison has 8 to 17 handoffs where the target would be 6 to 10, and so forth and so on. I mentioned the process path count on the prior slide. So in this particular process, we found that there's 174 different ways to traverse that as-is process, and IBM told us that, in fact, best class only has 100. So this could imply that we have 74 extraneous ways of getting from point A to Z. So again, just a data point to think about. So it's a real summary or a snapshot of how are we doing on that one particular process. Going to slide 15, we start talking about what-if scenario planning. So on the left, I referenced that same scorecard, that as-is scorecard that was on the prior page. On the right, we can have 3 new scorecards that say, well, if we do 2B scenario number 1, this is what our scorecard would look like. If we do 2B scenario number 2, this is what our scorecard would look like, and same thing with number 3. So you can really say, this is where the power of process modeling and simulation comes in, that here we are in the as-is world, this is our current cost and our current situation, this is where we want to be, and this is what we have to do to get there, and this is what it'll do to our cycle time and our cost for these processes. And I used the graphic in the middle to try to look like a bit of a dial, and I may not be the best artist in the world, but I use it to say that we identified opportunities. So if you look at this example, there's 145 or 146, I can't see it right now, opportunities. And if you look at that as a dial, the more you turn the dial to the right, the more you're addressing those opportunities, and the more aggressive you are at implementing those fixes or correcting those opportunities. And I believe that at the very highest level, those opportunities can really be broken into 3 categories. And those are listed on top. Policy, procedure, and governance would be one category. People and capabilities would be another, and technology would be another. And so I use this when we're talking to our steering committees to say that, and I think this is probably a very real scenario, when we got a lot of the as-is people in the room doing the as-is modeling, there was a little skepticism that, we've done this before, we've made recommendations for improvement, but by the time it goes all the way up to the top, it's going to require a policy change, and they're not going to want to do it. No one's going to want to change the policy. By using this sort of scenario planning and the as-is to the 2B, and using that as a dial up top, you can show the opportunity cost to the powers that be of their decisions. So if they decide, after all is said and done, that they don't want to change a policy that the team has recognized would make a huge impact in their current as-is process, you can use the tool to show them that if they keep, let's make a concrete example here. Let's say we're talking about delegations of authority, and the as-is world says the current delegation of authority is 500,000, and all of the as-is people say we would like to bring it up to 1 million. So we take we bring that suggestion up to the steering committee and we say, we'd like to change the delegation of authority from 500 to $1 million. If they say no, well, then the cost of the process stays the same. If they say, well, we don't agree with the $1 million, but we agree with the $750,000, let's go somewhere in the middle, you can, using the tool, you can show what the impact to the process will be in terms of cycle time and cost. So it's a great way to communicate to the decision makers the ramifications of their decisions. If they turn the dial all the way to the right on policy changes and people changes and technology changes, then you're going to squeeze all the juice out of this process and you're going to get to best class or best of breed if you want to. If you decide not to, then you're going to throttle it back and you're going to move those sliders around. But that's a business decision to be made by the appropriate people, and this is just a good way of communicating that information. So that is where we are in terms of what have we done to date. We did all the as-is process. We did the 2Bs, and we're building the 2B processes right now. The next step that I referred to earlier is we're going to be building the monitoring capability, and that is really putting all of the information, as I said earlier, on a dashboard for the purchasing management to be able to view real-time data about their process. So we're going to take all those processes that we've modeled and bring all of that data up into a monitoring dashboard. And really, I think the best way to describe it is talk about KPIs. I mean, I would say in most cases, a lot of the data that we're looking at is old or stale or after the fact. And a lot of the KPIs, after doing some interviews, some of the clients aren't happy with the KPIs. The information is not really role-based, so the VP gets to see the same data as the director, as the manager. And you can see here, little trending. Where we want to go on the tomorrow side is we want to be leading practice, so leading KPIs, current data. It's got to be action-oriented where clients can modify the behavior. It'll be role-based. We'll use trends and so forth and so on. So that's where we're going in terms of the monitoring. I'm very excited about it. And the objectives are listed on slide 17. Again, I'm not going to drain the slide in terms of reading it, but really we want to put meaningful data in front of the powers that be to make them have better information to manage their business on a real-time basis. And slide 18 is really talking about our next steps, is to continue selling BPM. And if there's one lesson that I'd like to share with the audience is when we implemented this at Keyspan and when I'm doing it now at Con Ed, every process that you do is sort of unique, and it's not textbook. You can't expect clients to come to you with the textbook situation and for you to take that textbook situation and have it fit perfectly with your vision. What I find is every process improvement engagement that we get involved with has its own nuances and has its own objectives, its own time frame, its own budget, and it may not directly fit perfectly with where you want to go with your vision, but ultimately each one taken individually incrementally gets you closer and closer to your vision. So I wouldn't be so steadfast about, meticulously achieving your vision. Your vision should be lofty. It is lofty. You'll get there, but just learn from each business process improvement engagement so that when the next one that comes up that happens to be similar, you don't make the same mistakes twice. So continue to sell it with each engagement, deliver with each engagement, build the staff, use consultants to train the trainer. We're using a lot of IBM folks now to come in and train us. Build the supporting infrastructure, as I talked about earlier. Develop your standards. Develop your process architecture. What does a good process model look like? Develop your technology plan. Make sure you're working with IT. It's got to be a collaborative initiative. And one thing, when I presented the vision for business process improvement to the CEO of Con Edison, I was very happy that he asked me towards my last slide. He said to me, well, it would seem to be that the selection of your next process would be critical. so he asked me how would I go about selecting the next business critical process. And I was so happy that he asked that, because clearly he understands the importance of what BPM can do for our processes. And I said, well, really, I don't want the BPM Center of Excellence deciding what the next process should be that we tackle. It really should be the senior officer team or himself. What keeps the senior officer team up at night? What are their worries? What are the pain points? Are there any financial burdens that we could alleviate or mitigate? Are there any processes that he considers broken that he really would like to fix? So I think it's really good to have the senior officer team get engaged and help define what the next best process would be to model. It is an expensive undertaking to model your processes and to go through it in the sequence that I talked about, the as-is, the to-be, getting all the people in the room, developing the monitoring and all the standards. It clearly is an expensive process, but it pays off because you have all of this documented and fully understood, and as I said at the very beginning, all your processes are assets. So I would say that the processes, the next process improvement should always consult with the senior officer team to figure out what's on their mind. But also, some good ideas come from the bottom up as well, so don't make it so exclusive that it has to come from top down. Business process improvement can come from anywhere, as long as there really is room for improvement, which I think there is in most processes. Some lessons learned. I talked about the textbook. Not every engagement is a textbook engagement. Challenges, both at Keyspan as well as Con Ed. You deliver one successful pilot of process improvement, and you literally have people banging on your door to use your services. It happened at Keyspan. It's certainly happening at Con Edison. We have more demand than we can manage, and so while we want to be very client-friendly and we want our customers to reach out to us whenever there's a need for improvement and to think of us first whenever there's a need for improvement, we can't take them on all at once, so we have to be very selective. So high demand. Right now, I would say we're not fully open for business yet. I mean, we're still in the infancy stages of building this business process improvement, even though we've made a lot of progress. I can't stand here before you and say that all of our standards and everything is at a level that we want it to be, but we're building the standards and methodology and processes as we're going to meet the needs of the organization, and it's working out very well. Manage your client expectations, which you should always be doing, and the other thing is this is a relatively new role for a lot of the people. I would think in any industry, but it was certainly new at Keyspan. It's brand new at Con Ed. You have a lot of people who are process-oriented and know how to map a process, but this is a new methodology, so it really is requires an analytical staff. Lessons learned: start small, continuously refine. Demand for BPM will exceed most of your optimistic forecasts, so be mindful of that. With experience and breadth, more things become important, so really develop your glossaries and all the impact analysis for everything that you're doing. When you facilitate these as-is workshops, neutral facilitation is key. You don't want to have a facilitator come in and give any sort of bias on any version of a process, because that would not make people tend to buy into what you're trying to do. And I really believe that BPM can be valuable on many levels, whether you go all the way up my Abraham Maslow hierarchy or even stop at the bottom level. There's a lot of things, a lot of juice that can be squeezed in any organization when you take a look at your processes and really understand what's going on behind the scenes. So I feel like I've talked my head off, and I hope I didn't bore the audience. I probably went fast. A lot of these are conceptual concepts, but if there are any questions, feel free to email the address you see on the screen, and they will know how to contact me directly. So thank you for this opportunity.
All right, Frank. Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate you taking the time to come down and share your expertise with our members. I think what's a great takeaway from the projects and the experiences that you guys are having is there's a lot of good practical advice that members of our community could take advantage of in your presentation, especially getting all the stakeholders in a single room in order to shorten those number of cycles and disconnects on identifying the processes and finding the real pain points. So we greatly appreciate you coming down and sharing your expertise. Before we let you run, I was hoping that we could dive a little bit deeper into a couple areas that you touched on during the presentation. And as you mentioned, if folks have any questions on either for Frank La Rocca directly or regarding the IBM products and services that were talked about, feel free to email me at grock@bpminstitute.org. We also have a couple links that we're providing, as we promised, to IBM's BPM BlueWorks, which is going to be going live next month in August. So this webcast is very timely to kind of introduce some of the capabilities and tools that'll be made available there, and also IBM's BPM site. You can get those two links on the slide here. But Frank, before we let you go, you touched on some of the trappings of success, and can you tell us or share with our members what some of the biggest challenges you're facing now about managing internal demand and how you're prioritizing new process improvement projects?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to the woman that I report to the other day, and she said, you got to be careful what you ask for. She goes, because every time I turn around, people are sort of demanding Frank's services. They say, oh, doesn't Frank do that? Doesn't Frank look at existing processes and help try to improve that? So when we have budget constraints and we need to, save a little money here, maybe Frank's Center of Excellence can do that, or maybe there's a problem in a particular process, maybe Frank's group can do that. So again, it's really about managing expectations. I didn't mention that I have a very small staff. I mean, I'm responsible for many things, one of them being the BPM COE. I have a director who's responsible for building the BPM COE, and he has only 3 people working for him. So in total, you have about four people plus me. So it's not a lot of people. And other than my director, all of the people are relatively new to business process improvement. So we've been training them. So we're really at the very early stages. So I've been very clear when I talk to the senior officers, my boss, when I talk to the CEO, that says, yes, I'm very excited about this vision. I believe it's really going to be a very big impact to Con Edison, but we can't take on 13 processes at once. We really have to be strategic, so help us pick the next strategic process. Let's just not run from process to process and not deliberate what the sequence of our processes should be. So it's really about managing expectations and continuously training ourselves and the staff and learning from our existing experiences.
Well, without giving away any trade secrets, Frank, you took us through the purchasing improvement process and project that you were on. Can you share with us some of the others that are on the near horizon for Con Edison?
Yeah, so I'm very pleased. Again, I've only been here a year, as I said, and I would say we completed. We're still working on the procurement one, which was the example that I gave, and we're up to the monitoring hierarchy level. We completed another one on our appropriations process. So how do we go about approval? What's our approval process for capital expenditures? So that was a very interesting engagement. That particular engagement was not as focused on reducing the cost associated with the process, but more the time. How long does it take to do a process? So that's what I was saying earlier, that each process has a different nuance. The procurement was really about cost and time. The appropriations is really more about time. Of course, if we could save money, we will, but the focus was really more on time. And then another process that we're working on now is our construction management. So how does Con Ed manage the whole construction management? We think about what we do and what we're responsible for in terms of New York City and providing electricity and gas. It's a pretty awesome accountability, and we have a lot of construction projects. And so one of the things that we're modeling is our construction management process. So it's very exciting.
All right, great stuff. And I think we have time for just one more, Frank. You had touched on the wide breadth of tools that IBM has within the WebSphere family, but could you zero in and let our member know some of the key tools that your team uses throughout the process improvement projects, and how is that?
Well, I would say really the key tool is the WebSphere suite. I mean, one of the things that there's probably a lot of other vendors on the market that provide the same or like functionality. I know when I was at Keyspan, I did a very thorough assessment of that, and we chose the IBM WebSphere, and we chose the same for the same reason at Con Ed. So WebSphere, I just consider it as a big bundle of modules, and the names, as I said earlier, change constantly within IBM, and I joke with them about that all the time. It's hard for me to keep track of module to module, but I lob it all into one big blob of my IBM WebSphere tool that has enabled us to do that whole hierarchy, from repository all the way up to the monitoring and ultimately the manipulation. If you ask me which specific modules within, I couldn't name them, to be honest with you.
All right, great. Well, that's good. No, if they've been that tightly integrated, then I think that's a mission accomplished on the IBM side.
Yeah, honestly, I don't even know if I want to know at this point. As long as it's there and it's working and we have the appropriate licensing agreement in place, I'm a happy camper.
All right, great. Well, Frank, we certainly wish you continued success and hope that you'll come back and keep us updated as your group continues to make progress at Con Edison. And I'd like to thank our members for attending today's session. Please take an opportunity to visit IBM's BPM BlueWorks next month as that comes online. And Frank La Rocca with Con Edison, we thank you ever so much for your time and sharing your expertise with our members today.
Thank you. I hope it was valuable.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We look forward to hosting you on a future roundtable, and for our members located on the East Coast, perhaps hosting you at our conference in Washington, D.C. in September, or in New York City the first week in November. Enjoy the summer, everyone. Thank you very much.